It's one thing to make a movie that is sort of similar to another one, but it's quite another to rip it off and make a film that basically copies the other. Stay tuned to the end when we'll show you how one studio lifted Disney's retelling of a classic fairy tale. If this is your first time visiting The Things, then hit the subscribe button and give this video a like. Today we're going to show you 10 animated movies that copied Disney. Tangled Up. Something that Disney has pretty much made its own over the years are animated adaptations of classic children's stories. However, for many years, one famous fairy tale was notable by its absence in Disney's canon, and that story was Rapunzel. However, that all changed when in 2010, Disney came up with Tangled. Costing a record $260 million, it was a massive hit. But like all hits, it inspired imitators. Perhaps the most notable imitator came in the shape of Tangled Up by British studio Brightspark. Now, we realize that as a classic children's story, anyone could have made a movie based on Rapunzel. However, the fact that Brightspark did it not long after Disney did theirs, and then it had a very similar title, probably should have rung alarm bells. In fact, you just had to watch through the credits of Tangled Up to note something was a bit amiss. You see, if you were observant enough, you would have noticed that there the movie was called Britannica's Fairy Tales from Around the World. It had been repackaged to cash in on the Tangled phenomenon, and people who had bought Tangled Up on DVD by mistake were quick to complain, saying that Tangled Up was poorly animated and not worth watching. So we guess it pays to pay attention to what DVD it is that you're buying. Wings. One of the most successful movie animation franchises of the 21st century has been the Cars films. The tales of Lightning McQueen, Chick Hicks, and Strip the King Weathers have generated 3 films, a video game, and millions of fans since the first movie came out in 2006. It was yet another runaway success for Disney's Pixar animation studios, and everyone wanted a piece of the action. That led Disney themselves coming out with Planes. Although some people thought that Planes was nothing more than a cash-in on Cars' massive success, Disney actually made sure that their film didn't contain elements that were too close to Pixar's movies. However, because Planes was a massive success, that meant that it too would inspire imitators. And perhaps these imitators were not quite as thorough in avoiding utilizing the source's material as Disney had been. This meant that shortly after word of Planes got out, we were hit with Wings. This is a Russian movie that looks, sounds, and feels a lot like both Planes and Cars. It is, we think, kinda shameless, but there is a bit of a difference, and that's that it doesn't quite work. Reviews for Wings were at best lukewarm, with concerns about relatively weak animation and the derivative plot. So take our advice here, you're better off sticking with Planes and Cars. Snow Queen. The great Danish writer Hans Christian Andersen is responsible for a range of stories that have passed into history and been turned into Disney classics. Because not only was the 1992 film The Little Mermaid based on Andersen's work, but also Frozen was inspired by The Snow Queen. However, what Frozen did was to take the story and make it Disney's own. However, other studios saw just how massive Frozen was and decided to do something of their own. One such example came from Russian studio Inlay Films. They also did their adaptation of the Hans Christian Andersen classic, and they almost kept with the original title by calling it Snow Queen. However, one big difference was that while Frozen was a massive success at the box office, Snow Queen actually lost money during its original Russian run. And while it wasn't panned by critics, Doug Ernholtz's role as Orm the Troll got good notices. It wasn't as warmly received as Frozen was. However, to give Inlay Films some credit, their movie was made quickly and was actually released a little bit before Frozen came out. But there had been word that Disney was going to do something based on the story for a number of years, so you can see how they were able to put out a spoiler. To be honest, if you've seen Frozen, then you'll be able to appreciate that it is much better than its counterpart. Ratatouille. Some ideas in storytelling are so distinctive, so unique, that when you hear the vaguest outline, you know exactly what it is we are talking about. Okay, let's try it out. Here's an animation about a rat who works in a kitchen. Are you thinking about Ratatouille yet? We think you are. If for some strange reason you haven't seen it, we'll tell you briefly what it's about. It concerns a rat named Remy who has a heightened sense of smell and dreams of being a top chef. We won't tell you too much more, but it's really good. We aren't the only ones to think that. It picked up an Academy Award for Best Animated Film. So of course it ended up generating its very own rip-off movie. That was made by Brazil's video Brinquedo, and it was called Ratatouille. While Ratatouille garnered fans and plaudits for its smart story and brilliant groundbreaking animation, Ratatouille didn't, not by a long way. Telling the story of Rio de Janeiro rat Marcel Touing and his desire to steal food to keep his restaurant going, it was criticized a lot by pretty much everyone. To be honest, its animation isn't a patch on Pixar's classic. Its story often doesn't make sense, and the voice acting is alright, but nothing like the original, and its title doesn't even make sense. The Secret of Mulan. When Disney released Mulan in 1998, they really broke the mold. This was the first time that they'd created an animated film whose basis and story wouldn't be well known to Western audiences. If you aren't familiar with the story of Mulan, then we'd better let you know what it's about and where it comes from. It's based on a series of ancient Chinese legends about Mulan, a warrior woman who takes her elderly father's place in the army and fights with honor. So while that story would be well known to Chinese audiences, you can see how it might be a bit of a risk for people in the West. However, the film exceeded expectations and became a huge hit all around the world. So as sure as night follows day, there were films that were, shall we say, inspired by Disney's latest blockbuster, and one of those was The Secret of Mulan. This film also took the Chinese legend as its inspiration, but it did something different with it, and that was that it decided to make the character of Mulan an insect. That was because the film was also partially inspired by A Bug's Life, which had opened in theaters to great success. So even though the DVD of The Secret of Mulan came with a free CD of the soundtrack, we'd advise that you watch the Disney original instead. Tiny robots. When you think back on all the classic movies, short cartoons, and live-action TV and film Disney has put out, you'd struggle to find a bad thing. Sure, there might be ones that you didn't like as much, but that's not the same thing. The truth is that they know who the target audience is for everything they do, and they hit the target every single time. In the world of mockbusters, there's one particular studio that sort of works as the knockoff Disney, and that's Brazil's Video Brinquedo. They seem to be the masters of putting their own low-budget twist on whatever smash hit Disney come up with. Back in 2008, Disney released WALL-E. This was a wonderful, charming, and touching tale of a robot on a mission to clean up the Earth. It won the Academy Award for Best Animated Film, and it was listed as the best film of the noughties by the prestigious Time magazine. But it inspired Brinquedo to make their own version. Seeing as the character of WALL-E was a tiny robot, they decided the film would be called Robozinhos, which, when translated into English, is tiny robots. Well, of course it is. You've now learned a little bit of Portuguese, which means you've probably got more out of watching this than you would watching that film. Kiara The Brave. Brave was yet another brilliant film from Disney that did really well at the box office. The story of Scottish Princess Merida touched the hearts of millions of people worldwide who watched it. It also entered into the heart of people looking to use it as an inspiration for their own movies. One such example was Kiara the Brave, a movie released by Indian studio Shamaru Entertainment. Looking at the movie artwork featuring a feisty-looking red-headed princess, you would imagine that it would be pretty much a straight copy of the Disney movie. Well, this is an example of appearances being deceiving. Princess Kiara is not the main character in this film. She's actually pretty minor and doesn't have any bearing on the plot. It's actually about a boy superhero called Super K who protects the Dream Zone from the villainous Badmus and Dr. Ozox. So you see, it's quite some way away from having the same story as Brave. In fact, outside of the United States, it was actually called Super K, and the other thing that made Brave so popular was its stellar cast, featuring a who's who of Scottish acting legends, as well as splendid animation. Again, Kiara the Brave didn't have those things, and it was heavily panned by both critics and regular viewers. This is one of the more shameless cash-ins. What's Up? The opening few minutes of Up are among the most touching in the history of cinema. The story of the marriage of Carl and Ellie Fredrickson are told in a heartbreaking way that sets the movie up and lets us know the characters' backstories. And the film keeps going from there. It was heralded as a masterpiece, and because it was so well received, it naturally inspired other films. One such example is What's Up by Brazilian studio Video Brinquedo. This movie tells the story of an elderly man who uses balloons to lift his house into the sky and fly away. If you've seen Up, then you'll know that is basically the premise of the whole film. However, that's where the similarities end. While Disney's Pixar Studios animation was lauded for its art and beauty, What's Up looks somewhat amateurish in comparison, and the plot is rather different too. While Up sees Carl and young stowaway Russell visit the tropical utopia of Paradise Falls, What's Up features a battle to save the world from aliens. Of course, they do manage to make it to the Amazon in the film, so that's another Up homage there, and the main character of What's Up is a mad scientist, which is why he uses balloons to lift his house up into the air and fly it away. Bug Bites, An Ant's Life. Any old studio can make a movie that rips off one film. However, it takes a certain kind of genius to make a movie that manages to rip off two blockbusters at the same time. Well, we've found the film that manages to do that, and that movie is Bug Bites, An Ant's Life. This is an incredibly derivative film because it catches onto the coattails of two movies that came out in 1998. Those films were both by big-name animation studios, were both hugely popular, and both featured insects. They were DreamWorks' Ants and the Disney Pixar movie A Bug's Life. Although they were very different films, there was a bit of a legal dispute between the studios over who came up with the idea first and whether one of the films was ripping off the other. It didn't really matter though, though, because both films were absolutely brilliant. They both had cool stories, fantastic animation, and some impressive voice acting. These were things that we think were missing from Bug Bites and Ants Life. This was an incredibly derivative film both in terms of feel and plot. It even went all the way down to the poster where the S in ants was reversed so that it kind of looked like the letter Z. However, in its own way, it was even more groundbreaking and innovative than the films it ripped off. It was the very first 3D mockbuster. The Frog Prince. Something that we've noticed Disney doing, and doing well, when it comes to their adaptations of classic stories is giving them a new twist. One of the best examples of this that we've seen in recent years was in The Princess and the Frog. This was the very first time that the lead character, Tiana, was African American. What Disney did was take the original fairy tale and transport it into the middle of the 20th century in New Orleans, Louisiana. And they put in some show-stopping songs and some beautifully classic animation. We ended up with another great Disney movie. However, we do need to say one thing at this point, and that is, of course, that the story that the film was based on was a classic fairy tale. That means that if someone made a movie based on it, then we would try to be generous and say that it wasn't necessarily a ripoff. However, if you look at the DVD artwork for The Frog Prince, then you might notice the combination of an African American princess and the style of drawing and say that this was a copy of the Disney film. Well, it is, but it isn't anywhere near as good. But we wondered whether there were any other Disney copies that we've missed. Don't be shy, tell us in the comments. And that's all for our 10 animated movies that copied Disney. If you liked this video, don't forget to subscribe and give it a big thumbs up. Thanks for watching and see you next time.